Injustice against Black people does not discriminate, and it never has. From slavery to present day, there has never been a safe place or escape or hiding spot for Black people from injustice. Whether you are male or female, young or old, it did not and does not matter. In this video, I want to tell you a story that highlights how vicious injustice and Jim Crow was in going after Black women and girls. I want to tell you a story about a little Black girl that suffered so much for something that everyone knew that she did not do. Before I get into this story, I have to give you some historical context first. This is important to understand how Jim Crow was relentless in his quest to demonize and harm Black girls and Black women. So give me a few moments to talk about this, and then I'll tell you about what happened to this Black child. I want to give you some startling figures first. Between 1880 and 1930, lynch mobs took the lives of at least 130 Black women, and countless more Black women and girls were tortured, mutilated, tarred and feathered, fired at, burned, stabbed, dragged, whipped, or violated by mobs all across the South. Black women and girls were afforded no respect or dignity or due process. Their gender did not exclude them from the horrors of racism and injustice. Despite this false image that Hollywood often portrayed of the loving Black mammy, cook, and nursemaid, that's not how Black women and girls were seen in the days after emancipation. Black women were seen as dangerous and conniving. As early as 1865, white newspapers began to depict and write about Black women as being ignorant and depraved. Papers highlighted stories of Black women accused of harming white people, and Black women became the subject of white hysteria about Black criminality. And of course, this led to the belief that lynching Black women and girls and subjecting them to harsh criminal punishment was justified. Negative images only helped to feed this media frenzy to demonize Black women and girls and to subject them to legal executions and mob lynchings. Take a look at this image that appeared in a September 1867 issue of Harper's Weekly magazine. It's titled, "Whipping a Negro Girl." In this image, you see the entire community come together to beat a Black woman.
I think these videos are important. Like I said, this is from Julian Johnson's Law YouTube channel, but these are important for our sisters to understand because the Sexy Reds, Cardi B's, Megan Thee Stallions, those are not influences, but those are the influences that the European used to brainwash our women, while the same European descents are the same ones who did all these horrific things to our sisters, our women.
Here's another from 1878. It was supposed to show Black women arguing and fighting outside a saloon. These images and news stories all serve to demonize Black women and girls, to strip them of their femininity, and to portray them as being just as dangerous as Black men. All of this ensured that when a Black female was accused of a crime, there would be no sympathy for her. This translated into the criminal justice system. Margaret Harris was hanged in front of 5,000 people in 1882 after being convicted of allegedly taking the life of a white infant. In 1892, a 13-year-old mentally delayed child named Milby Brown was hanged after being sentenced to die for allegedly poisoning a white child. By the 1890s, the demonization of Black women and the creation of this mythological monstrous Black woman had taken hold of Southern imaginations. In 1891, the Louisville Courier-Journal ran a story with the headline, "Feast of Human Flesh," the body of a child sold for meat by an inhumane mother.
Did y'all know that they used to eat us? They would burn us and then eat our flesh?
It was about a Black woman who allegedly took her child's life and sold her flesh and called it tender. Articles like this continue to confirm whites' beliefs that Black women were dangerous and whites needed to be protected from Black women. Black women became known as mammies who took the lives of white children that they cared for, poisoned white families, stole, and set their employers' homes on fire. Over 40 Black women were lynched in the 1890s. Crimes ranged from taking the life of a white person to stealing a Bible. It was this climate that Mary Booth found herself in when Jim Crow came looking for her. Mary Booth was born in 1868 to Harriet and Benjamin Booth. She was one of 8 children. Mary and her siblings did not attend school. Like many Black people during their time, fresh into emancipation, Black children worked outside the home to help support their families. In 1882, she was 13 years old and worked for the family of Clara and Reuben Gray at Mount Pleasant Plantation in Surry County, Virginia. That was a majority Black county in the southeastern part of Virginia. Mary worked there with her mother Harriet and her older sister Virginia. Clara Gray and her husband had moved to Virginia a few years before. Clara was originally from New York and Reuben was from Chicago and was the son of the former mayor of Chicago. The two had met in Colorado where Reuben pursued a career in mining and Clara was an investor. They then moved to Virginia to take on the life of Southern planters. This desire for continued reinvention should have been a sign that there was something really wrong with this family. Mary worked as a cook and as a nurse for the family. Nurse is just another name for child caretaker. This was a position that many young Black girls who worked outside the home had. This led to them being treated less like the children that they were and more like adults who were responsible for caring for white children. This meant that Black children like Mary would not be granted the same youthful and innocent status of the white children that they were caring for. On April 7th, 1882, Clara Gray and the overseer of the plantation, Travis Jones, both died suddenly. It's believed that they had been poisoned. A few days after their deaths, the police arrested Mary Booth and another Black female who worked at the plantation named Martha Jones. The white press had a field day with this story. They wasted no time in portraying Martha and Mary as villainous Black women. Papers from all across the country picked the story up. They harped on their Blackness and their youth as the primary reason for this horrific event. As the weeks went on, the focus shifted to Mary being the person responsible for this alleged crime. Mary's older sister, 15-year-old Virginia, she was also arrested and charged with being involved. On May 24th, 1882, both Mary and Virginia were both brought to the court for arraignment.
Just for those who like to may think that these stories are made up, you have to remember, and this is why I like this brother's platform, because he gives you the newspaper articles. Now his images may be AI generated, like he puts in his images, but he has the news articles to back up his stories. And so here's an article from Petersburg, Virginia, May 24th. And it has Booth and Mary, or Virginia Booth and Mary Booth. So it has both their names on there. And the story he's talking about is right here. You know what I'm saying? The deceased were killed by drinking coffee in which arsenics had been placed by the accused. And so they died out drinking coffee.
And charged with the deaths of Clara Gray and Travis Jones. After being arraigned, Mary and Virginia were placed in the Surry County Jail. The mood was so tense in the area that there were talks of lynching these two girls. And this was a real fear that I'm sure Mary and Virginia both thought about as they spent nights and weeks and months awaiting trial. Would they be taken from the jail, like so many Black people had before, and lynched before their trial even began? And we also have to remember that these were two little girls. They were children sitting in the county jail awaiting trial for a crime that Black people did not escape. They were not taken to a juvenile facility because the juvenile court system had not been created yet. They were sitting in an adult jail. I can only imagine the terror and confusion they felt. This was a nightmare that no child could imagine, and for them, it was real, and they did not wake up from it. Judge R.W. Arnold presided over the trial. Here's what I found most interesting about the trial. There were Black people who made it onto the jury. The jury had 8 Black men on it. Now, remember, this was still just a few years after the Civil War and after emancipation, so none of them could read or write. The sisters were represented by attorney R.E. Boykin. For the prosecution, the state had help. Reuben Gray, Clara's husband, he hired attorneys to help prosecute the case for the state. He wanted to make sure that Mary and Virginia took the fall for this crime. Even though attorney Boykin filed motions and did his best to represent the girls, he was simply outmatched. Records from the trial are no longer present, but here's what research about the case was able to uncover. Mary was tried first. There were no eyewitnesses to testify about what happened. And even though newspapers claimed that the girls confessed, that was not true. Neither girl confessed. And in fact, they both denied having anything to do with the deaths. Mary endured a very long trial. The state called more than 20 witnesses in its quest to convict Mary. Attorney Boykin did not call Mary to testify in her own defense. Now, this was not uncommon in Virginia back then. Virginia did not give people accused of crimes the right to testify until 1886. So Mary might have been prevented from testifying in her own defense. One of the theories...
That's all I was about to say. So you couldn't speak up in your own defense until 18, whatever year he said, what year he said that was?
Back then. Virginia did not give people accused of crimes the right to testify until 1886.
Okay, so until 1886, the accused couldn't defend themselves. So you could say, oh, I stole a candy bar, or he took a napkin off the table he wasn't supposed to take. And even though the napkin could have failed, or whatever the case may be, I'm just throwing a scenario out there. I'm just giving an example. But the napkin could have failed. And because the napkin wasn't seen falling, but the napkin was misplaced, you accuse me of taking the napkin, and now they gonna lynch me for taking the napkin from a white man or a white one, or from the white's table.
So Mary might have been prevented from testifying in her own defense. One of the theories presented by the prosecution was that Virginia and Mary committed the crime because they wanted to steal money that was hidden in the house. And it was their desire for money that led them to come up with a plan to poison the family. Poisoning the white families by black cooks was a common fear amongst middle-class whites. Almost all well-to-do white people had a black cook, and the fear from slavery that black servants would poison them did not end with emancipation. There are countless stories of black women and girls being executed and lynched on suspicion that they poisoned the white family that they worked for. Many times, these allegations were based on pure speculation. After hearing the evidence, the jury went to deliberate. Even though Mary did not get to testify in her own defense, not all of the jurors were convinced of her guilt. There was one holdout who did not believe that Mary committed the crime and refused to vote for conviction. Finally, after pressuring that jury to change their vote, on June 30th, 1882, the jury returned its verdict. It unanimously found Mary Booth guilty of taking the life of Clara Gray. Judge Arnold immediately sentenced Mary to die by hanging on November 17th, 1882. Mary was to suffer a similar fate as other black girls who have been accused of similar crimes. As for Virginia, it's not clear what happened to her. Records indicate that her trial was continued for a later date, and for reasons unknown, she was later released and the prosecution against her was dropped. You have to wonder what exactly happened in the jury deliberations. Why did one juror hold out initially and refuse to vote guilty? Were the jurors pressured to vote one way because of intimidation or because of threats? Remember, there were 8 black men on this jury. Did they all really believe that this black child had committed this horrific crime for no apparent reason? We don't know exactly what happened during deliberations, but what happened after the verdict does give us some insight into the jurors' thinking on Mary's involvement in the deaths. Almost immediately after the verdict and Mary being sentenced to die, every single juror signed a petition to Governor William E. Cameron recommending that he take action and grant Mary clemency and spare her the death sentence she received and instead give her life in prison. Mary's attorney, R.E. Boykin, he also kept fighting to free Mary. He filed a clemency appeal to the governor on her behalf. This is the actual clemency appeal that attorney Boykin filed in 1882. In the appeal, he wrote that Mary was a poor Negro girl who was 13 years old. He said that she did not have money to pay for a lawyer to appeal her case to try to reverse her conviction. He also said that Mary was innocent of the crime and the evidence was circumstantial against her, and she should be spared the death sentence. And Judge Arnold, who sentenced her to death, he also wrote to the governor on Mary's behalf. He said that the ends of justice will be met by commuting Mary's sentence to life in prison. He said that Mary's age and youthful appearance were the reasons for his decision to write the governor. After Mary was convicted and sentenced to death, she remained in the Surrey County Jail for months, awaiting her execution. She remained there without her sister and no parents. No loved ones to tend to her. She was a 13-year-old child in an adult county jail, waiting to be executed for something that she did not do. I can only imagine the fear and terror that she must have felt. And despite pleas for help and commutation, help did not come. Mary's attorney's request to the governor was denied. It looked like Mary would be executed. As her execution date approached, plans began to take shape to carry out her sentence. A crew began constructing the gallows that Mary would be hung at. And what's worse is that Mary saw them building it. The execution platform that would be used to execute her was less than 2 feet beneath her jail window. Remember, this is a child witnessing this, not some hardened criminal. This was a 13-year-old child watching plans being made to take her life. Because Mary was so small, a special coffin had to be built just to accommodate her small body.
See, I think about this and then the Emmett Till, not Emmett Till, but the George Stinney, my apologies. But he was 13 when he was executed. And so just the thought of a child going through that, you know what I mean, what's going on in their mind, their fear, especially when they didn't do something.
And there was excitement around witnessing the execution of this child. Papers continued to report on the upcoming execution. People were traveling from far and wide to witness this barbaric act of injustice. They came on foot and on horseback to get a chance to witness this. One person even died in the rush to get there. A woman named Martha Spratley lost her life and her daughter was seriously injured when their cart was struck by another cart. Mary's father, Benjamin Booth, was among those that gathered to witness this event. But Benjamin did not come just to view the execution of his child. He came to rescue her. Benjamin had devised a plan to save Mary's life. On the day of the execution, Benjamin was going to wait for the sheriff to remove Mary from her jail cell. As Mary was being taken from the jail to the gallows outside, Benjamin would move in to try to take his little girl and get her to safety. It was a daring plan and it was dangerous, but Benjamin was willing to do it, even if it cost him his life. But Benjamin never got to carry out his rescue plan because something happened that shocked everyone. Plans were underway to carry out Mary's execution. The gallows were built. The tiny coffin was ready. A minister named Bailey Wyatt was brought in to give Mary her last rites. He tried to get Mary to come clean about what she had done before being executed. He asked her 6 times in 6 different ways if she was guilty, but Mary maintained her innocence and said that she did not do this. On November 16, 1882, one day before Mary was set to be hanged, Virginia Governor William Cameron stayed her execution and commuted her sentence to life in prison. The governor said that Mary's extreme youth and the entire jury that convicted her, recommending that she be given clemency, was the reason he was acting. To avoid Mary being lynched, the sheriff removed Mary from Surry County Jail and took her to the state prison in Richmond. The situation was so dire that Mary was hurried out of the jail with extreme urgency. The sheriff told Mary to hurry up and grabbed her as she was rushed out. Mary, only 13 years old, was confused and complained that she needed to stop and tie her shoes first. The sheriff told Mary to hurry and that he would tie her shoes for her later. This is another example of her youth on display. The sheriff was trying to save her from a lynching, and Mary wanted to stop to make sure her shoes were properly tied. People were not happy that Mary's sentence had been commuted. Almost immediately after the governor issued his clemency order,
The fact that you have all these adults, grown men and women, who were excited to see a child being hung is crazy to me. In today's times, everybody out here, they'll say they're against it, but in today's time, it still goes on. And free their brother, Carmelo Anthony, the young brother in Texas. I just saw they sentenced him for defending himself. And so free him, because they're still lynching young children today just for defending themselves, whether it be with a noose or in prison. They took the noose from this young girl and would rather give her life, something she didn't do. How many so-called black people are incarcerated now for life in 20, 30, 40 years? I know a man right now been gone 15 years for a crime he didn't do. I did the video on my channel. If you haven't, go check out the interview with Shannon Smith. It's so many stories, so many people, so many wrongful convictions, so many people that's been falsely accused.
Officials in Surry County said that they intended to prosecute Mary for the death of Travis Jones. They had previously closed this case after securing her conviction for Clara Gray's death. Now, they were going to reopen it to try to make sure that Mary got the death penalty once again. Mary arrived at the Virginia Penitentiary in Richmond on November.
They wanted to get his baby the death penalty.
November 17, 1882. This is a copy of the logbook documenting Mary's entrance into the prison. When Mary entered the prison, she was far from the only black person there. There were 964 prisoners there. 83 of them were black females, and 114 of the inmates were black youth. One of them was even younger than Mary was. Roderick Ferguson was 9 years old, serving a 10-year sentence. This was a dangerous place for Mary, who was just turning 14 years old. This was
How you 9 years old serving a 10-year sentence?
a dangerous place for Mary, who was just turning 14 years old. This adult prison was full of horrors, from forced labor to physical abuse, to squalid conditions and poor sanitation that bred disease. It was a dangerous place for children there. They were subjected to unspeakable things. A 10-year-old boy named Thomas Nowlin died after he fell into a tub of boiling liquid.
Wow.
And we have to remember that Mary was a small, defenseless little girl who really could not protect herself in a place like this. Her age and size made her a prime target. In prison, there was no separation for small children like Mary from the adults and the hardened criminals. Mary would have been made to do the same work as the adults. She would have been made to sleep in the same cells and dorms as the adults. And she would have been subjected to the same punishments as the adults. And it wasn't just the physical conditions, but also the emotional toll that this took on Mary. She was a child in an adult prison, separated from her family during a time when her body likely would have been experiencing changes. She had no family member to help guide her through these changes. She had to rely on the compassion of other prisoners to explain to her what her body might have been experiencing.
Her going through her cycle and becoming a young woman.
Mary should have died in prison, but once again, the unexpected happened. Benjamin Booth had already planned one rescue to save his daughter. Luckily for him and Mary, he was not able to go through with it. But this father was determined to save his little girl from an unjust fate that many wanted so desperately for her to suffer. Remember, it was Clara Gray and Travis Jones that died. Reuben Gray, Clara's husband, for some reason, did not consume the poison that his wife and Travis had. And also, for some strange reason, no one saw this as being suspicious. It should have been obvious that the husband was the prime suspect. But this was the 1880s. Just a few years after.
I didn't even think about that. I mean, I forgot he said that, but damn, so the husband did it, and this little girl got blamed for it.
Of slavery, and race was all that mattered. The fact that Mary was black was all that was needed to put and keep the focus on her for this crime. In August of 1882, 3 months before Mary was to be hanged for the crime that Reuben Gray had paid to have her prosecuted for, Reuben took his own life. News reports claimed that he was suffering from grief, but that was far from the truth.
He did.
There were rumors of infidelity between Clara and Reuben. If this were a 21st century episode of a crime show, Reuben would have been suspect number one. He had all of the motive to carry out this crime, and Mary had none. She had no reason to poison Clara or Travis, and she certainly would have had no reason not to poison Reuben if her intent was to take out this entire family. But like I said, Mary's arrest and prosecution was not about the truth. It was about race. The fact that she was a young black female made her an easy person to blame this entire incident on. But there was just one problem. There were many people in Surry County who did not believe that Mary committed this crime. If you remember, all the jurors signed a petition to have Mary's sentence commuted. The judge who sentenced her to death also wrote to the governor and requested that her life be spared. But this was not enough because the governor rejected these requests and only spared Mary's life from being hanged at the last minute. Mary was to spend the rest of her life in prison. She was supposed to die there, and she would have died there had it not been for the continued fight of those who believed that she was truly innocent. After Reuben Gray took his life, the belief that he was the real perpetrator only intensified in Surry County. People from all walks of life supported Mary being pardoned and released from prison. Benjamin Booth, Mary's father, he personally delivered a letter to Governor Cameron petitioning for his daughter to be released. But this letter was not just from him. It was from a host of supporters. It was signed by C.A. Jackson, who was the owner of a tobacco processing plant and might have been Benjamin's employer. The letter asked that the governor grant Mary clemency and pardon her. In the letter, Jackson wrote that the community now believed that Mary was innocent and it was Reuben Gray, not Mary Booth, that took Clara Gray and Travis Jones's lives. The letter was also signed by clerks of court, justices of the peace, attorneys, and Judge Arnold, who sentenced Mary to hang. They all came together to show their support for Mary and their belief that she was innocent. On Christmas Eve of 1885, Governor Cameron was at the end of his term in office. He pardoned Mary Booth. Injustice had caused Mary to spend years of her life in prison for a crime that she did not commit. But injustice did not take her life. And this was thanks to the continued fight of those who knew that Mary Booth was innocent. But I have to mention that Mary was not fully exonerated. The official reason for her pardon was mercy on account of her age, not the fact that she was wrongfully convicted. Saying that a black person was wrongfully convicted for the actions of a white person was a bridge too far for the governor and the white press in 1885. But nevertheless, Mary was freed from prison, but she wasn't freed from the trauma that a false arrest, a rigged prosecution, a death sentence, a near lynching, and spending years as a child in an adult prison caused her. Records of what happened to Mary after her release are sparse, but here's what research shows. Mary continued to live in Surry County. In 1890, she was around 22 years old. She married a 27-year-old farmer named Walker Charity. They did not stay married long. 5 years later, in 1895, Mary's husband filed for divorce. He claimed that Mary had left him and she was unfaithful and had committed adultery with several men. Mary left the state and was never heard from again. I don't believe that anyone should say anything about Mary's marriage to Walker, his allegations, or say anything negative about her, because it would not be fair. Mary was born in 1868, 3 years after the end of the Civil War and slavery. This was the beginning of a new chapter in American history, but it was also the beginning of the next chapter of injustice against Black people. This was not a good time for Black people. Jim Crow, segregation, Black codes, convict leasing, lynching, and so many of the other horrors that Black people face for the next century were born during this time. Now,
if y'all interested in knowing about the Black codes, type Black codes in the comments. I keep saying each time I do a video of his, I'm gonna explain the Black codes, and I haven't broke that down yet. But if y'all know about the Black codes, or you want to know about the Black codes, leave Black codes in the comment, and I'll do a video on the Black codes, the Christian Black codes of 1724.
Add on top of that a Black child, 13 years old, who was arrested and convicted of taking the lives of 2 white people. She is then sentenced to hang. She's separated from her family while she awaits her execution. And at the last minute, her life is spared, but not really. It's spared to spend the rest of her life in prison with hardened adults. We don't know the horrors that Mary Booth experienced as a child in prison in the 1890s. We can't even begin to imagine what that was like. Prison is a violent and depressing place today. 130 years ago, it was 10 times worse, especially for a black person, especially for a 13-year-old black girl. What kind of effect do you think that had on Mary Booth? Do you think that she came out like a regular teenager, ready to thrive in life? Do you think that she was ready to go off and be married and raise a family and live a normal life as if nothing had happened to her? That trauma and pain that she experienced, combined with the fact that she was re-entering a world that devalued her humanity because of the color of her skin, is a combination that would have been enough to make the strongest person crumble under the weight of what they had gone through.
What I got from this is that the woman was cheating on her husband with the other guy. He poisoned him. The little girl was charged with it because of her status of being classified as black. And the man couldn't take it, and he ended up offing himself. Let me know what y'all got from the story in the comments.